She had nothing left. No shoes, no money, no hope. So she did the one thing no mother should ever have to do. She held out her own children to a stranger and begged him to take them. But the man standing in that alley was not just any stranger. He was the most feared man in the city. His hands were covered in tattoos. His empire was built on violence. And the last time someone threatened what belonged to him, they disappeared. When he looked at her children, something in his face changed. Not pity, not kindness, something far more dangerous. Recognition. Because 15 years ago, a 12-year-old girl vanished from his life in exactly 23 minutes. And he had spent every day since making sure it never happened again. What he did next set off a chain of events that brought killers to his front door, put a gun to her head, and forced him to make an impossible choice. Not everyone in this story survives the way you think they will. If that grabbed your attention, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. I am releasing another incredible story tomorrow. While you are here, leave a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from. I truly love seeing how this community spans the entire globe. This is a story about the moment a man who had everything discovered, the one thing his power could never buy, and how a mother who had nothing gave him the only thing that could save him. It will change the way you think about strength, family, and what it really means to protect someone. All right, let us dive in. The sky unleashed a relentless downpour on the forgotten backstreets of the East District, a torrent that seemed determined to cleanse the city of its corruption. Dim neon signs sputtered against the slick asphalt, casting shimmering reds and blues onto puddles that distorted the reflection of a world that had long since turned its back. Pressed against a wall covered in spray-painted murals, Camilla Parsons sat with her bare feet growing numb on the freezing concrete, her two small children shivering uncontrollably in her embrace. They were like fragile birds that had fallen too far from the safety of their nest. For 2 agonizing days, hunger had been their only companion. Her daughter, a little girl of maybe 5 years old, hid her face deep in Camilla's chest, her tiny fingers twisting into the frayed material of her mother's worn jacket. Her son, older by just a year or two, sat bolt upright next to them, his eyes wide with a chilling awareness that no child should possess. Both of them were dressed in clothes that were soaked completely through, hanging from their small bodies and offering no defense against the biting wind. A pale blue color was beginning to stain their lips, the first cruel sign of the cold seeping into their bones. Their breathing was faint and shallow. Camilla whispered assurances that felt like lies on her tongue. "It is going to be okay, my sweet ones. Everything is okay. I am right here." But she was far from okay, and her children could feel the truth in her trembling. Headlights from passing cars would occasionally slice through the alley's entrance, flashing over them like prison searchlights. For a fleeting moment, their suffering was illuminated, only to be plunged back into the oppressive darkness. Not one car slowed down, not one person glanced their way. In the East District, survival meant learning what not to see. Camilla had been on the run for 5 relentless days. The men who were hunting her family were not the type to ever give up. They were predators who made children vanish, absorbing them into vast, dark networks that stretched across the country and over borders, into hidden places where a child's scream had no echo and a name was meaningless. She had seen the unmarked black vans patrolling her street with a chilling regularity. She had overheard hushed warnings at the local shelter, right before it was mysteriously shut down. She had felt the predatory stares on her children at the bus stop, a feeling that made her skin crawl, so she took them and fled. That desperate flight had led her here, to this dead end, without shoes, without money, and completely trapped. Her son let out a terrible, liquid cough that sounded like rattling in his small chest, and it made her own heart seize with fear. She placed a gentle kiss on his wet hair, fighting back her own tears and struggling to keep her body from shaking. And that is when she heard it. The deep, smooth hum of a powerful engine, a sound entirely different from the city's usual noise. It was quieter, heavier, and it radiated wealth. Camilla's breathing stopped as a pair of polished black tires rolled into the alley, coming to a halt about 10 feet from where they huddled. The headlights were a blinding wall of white light. She instinctively raised a hand to shield her face, pulling her children even closer into the cold brick wall. The engine went silent. A car door opened with a solid click, and out of the night emerged a man who looked as though he were crafted from shadow and pure authority. He was a tall man, standing well over 6 feet, with a powerful frame that was barely concealed by an expensive, tailored black suit. He wore no tie, and his collar was open just enough to show the dark ink that snaked up his neck like a permanent wisp of smoke. More tattoos covered the backs of his hands, with elaborate designs across his knuckles that seemed to capture the faint neon glow as he stood perfectly still in the downpour. His face was composed of hard lines and sharp angles, with a strong jaw that appeared to be set in a permanent state of tension. His dark hair was slicked back by the falling rain, and his eyes were cold as they methodically scanned his surroundings. The rain seemed to slide right off his broad shoulders, as if the storm itself recognized his dominance. His gaze moved with the unnerving stillness of a hunter, taking in the splintered wooden crates, the overflowing metal dumpster, the layers of graffiti, and then, finally, his eyes landed on her children, who were pathetically trying to find something to eat in a ripped garbage bag. In that instant, his expression changed. There was a flash of fury, but beneath it was something much deeper. It was the pain of recognition, an old grief that had hardened into unyielding resolve. A frantic drumming started in Camilla's chest. She understood what kind of men he was. They were men in suits that cost a fortune who drove cars that were worth more than her entire life. They were the men who owned neighborhoods like this one from the shadows. They were the men who always got what they wanted. "You should not be in this place," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the sound of the storm. It was not delivered as a threat, it was stated as an undeniable fact. Camilla could only shake her head, the motion mixing the cold rain and her hot tears on her face. "There is nowhere else for us to go." Her voice was a fragile, broken thing. "My children have not eaten for 2 days." She gently lifted her daughter's tiny hand to show him, the fingers tinged with blue from the cold, hanging limp and lifeless. "Please," Camilla whispered, the word torn from her soul. "Take them." The man froze, his expression one of pure shock, as if her words had physically struck him. "Take my children," he repeated, his own voice now soft, the words landing between them like heavy stones. "Yes." Camilla's throat was raw and burning. "You seem like a person with influence. You could offer them a future, a real life." She swallowed against her fear, standing barefoot and trembling in a pool of grimy water. "The men who are after us. They take children. They do terrible things to them." Her voice finally shattered. "But you look like someone who could keep them safe." Her son made a weak attempt to get to his feet, but his shaking legs gave out, and he collapsed back against the brick wall. He was too frail, too exhausted. The man's jaw tightened visibly, and a drop of rain traced a path down the sharp angle of his cheek. "Please," Camilla begged one last time, her desperation demolishing the last fragments of her pride. "I do not care what you do to me. Just take my children. Let them have a chance to live." For what felt like an eternity, he remained completely still, saying nothing. Then, Daman Rios did something she could never have predicted. He moved forward, not with menace, but with a quiet resolve that was even more unnerving. He crouched down until he was at eye level with her son. His tattooed hand reached out, moving with a steady and gentle purpose, and he rested it on the boy's small shoulder. "I do not separate families," he said, his voice low and firm. Camilla blinked, her terror momentarily pierced by utter confusion. Damon rose to his full height, the rain continuing to stream down his face, and he fixed those intense, cold eyes on her once more. "You are all coming with me." "What?" The single word escaped her lips, sounding fractured and small. "All of us?" He made a simple gesture with his head toward the black sedan. Camilla just stared at him, this intimidating stranger with ink-stained skin and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. She felt something deep inside her chest begin to fracture and break open. It was not the feeling of safety, not quite yet, but it was the faint, terrifying possibility of it. "Why?" she whispered, the question barely audible. Damon's severe expression remained unchanged, but for a split second, his eyes revealed a flicker of something deeply human beneath his hardened exterior. "Because no one else will." As if summoned by his words, two other men got out of the sedan. They were silent and disciplined, dressed in dark, functional clothing. They moved with the focused efficiency of soldiers, asking no questions. Damon shrugged off his expensive suit jacket and gently draped it around the little girl's shoulders. The garment completely enveloped her tiny frame. "Can you walk?" he asked Camila. She managed a numb nod, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. "Then it is time to go." As the large black car pulled away from that forgotten, rain-lashed alley, with Camilla barefoot in the back and her children wrapped in a powerful stranger's coat, she understood something that should have filled her with dread. But instead, it did not. Damon Rios had not asked for her name. He had not asked any questions about who or what she was running from. He had simply looked at her situation and declared her his responsibility. In a city like this, that kind of declaration held immense weight. The sedan glided through the gleaming, wet streets like a phantom, the only sound being the steady, rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. Camilla sat perfectly still in the spacious back seat. Her daughter was curled up against her chest, and her son was pressed tightly to her other side. The violent shivering had stopped for both of them, though she could not tell if it was because of the car's powerful heater or from complete and utter exhaustion. Damon was in the front passenger seat, holding a phone to his ear, his words spoken in short, clipped commands that gave away very little. "Lock down the perimeter. Nobody gets into that building unless I approve it." There was a brief pause. "I do not care what time it is. Get it done now." He disconnected the call without bothering to wait for a reply. Camilla found herself watching the back of his head, noticing the dark hair and the edge of the tattoos that rose above his shirt collar, as she desperately tried to comprehend what was unfolding around her. Powerful men like him were not in the business of rescuing people. They were in the business of owning them. She had heard the chilling stories whispered in the hushed corners of shelters and at desolate bus stations. Stories of young women who were lured away with false promises of assistance, only to vanish forever. Stories of children used as collateral. She instinctively tightened her arms around her own kids. "Where are you taking us?" Her voice sounded much stronger than she actually felt. Damon turned his head just enough for the passing streetlights to illuminate his profile. It was sharp, controlled, and radiated danger. "To a safe place." "That is not a real answer. It is the only answer you are going to receive for now." Camilla's heart began to pound against her ribs. Her eyes darted to the car doors, confirming they were locked, and then to the deeply tinted windows. The driver and the other man in the front seat were like statues, silent, imposing, and clearly devoted to the man who gave the orders. She was completely trapped. "Stop the car," she said, her voice sharp with sudden realization. "Let us out of here." Damon's expression did not flicker. "No. I said stop this car." Her voice began to rise, raw panic starting to claw its way up her throat. "I do not know who you are. I do not know what you want with us." "What I want," Damon cut in, his tone as cold and precise as a surgeon's blade, "is for your children to have a meal and a warm bed, instead of dying from pneumonia in a gutter." He turned completely in his seat then, and his dark, intense eyes locked onto hers. "What I do not want is to release you back into the night so the men who are hunting you can complete their objective." Camilla flinched as if he had struck her. "How do you know that anyone is hunting us?" "Because I have been tracking their movements for the last 3 days." The only sound in the car was the drumming of the rain on the roof. Camilla stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. What? Damon leaned back into the leather seat, his jaw tight. The men you are running from have been operating inside my territory. They have been moving through the East District for weeks now, preying on vulnerable families, single mothers, and runaways. They target the people that nobody will ever come looking for. His voice dropped, becoming laced with a lethal venom. They made a grave error in assuming that I would not take notice. You have been tracking them? Yes. Why? His eyes hardened into something that looked like chips of obsidian. Because they broke my rules. I blinked, struggling to understand his declaration. No children would be harmed on his streets. He spoke the words like they were scripture, an absolute and final law. The people who took us thought they could act without any fear of reprisal. They were about to learn they were terribly wrong. The little boy shifted at Camilla's side, his small hand clutching the fabric of her jacket. She glanced down at his pale, exhausted face. He was trusting her to protect him, even though she had no idea how she possibly could. So what happens now? Camilla whispered, her voice trembling. Are you planning to use us as some kind of trap? Damien's expression changed, but it was not anger she saw. It was something far worse. It was disappointment. If I had wanted to set a trap, he said calmly, I would have left you in that filthy alley and simply waited for them to return. He faced forward again. I do not use children, not for anything, ever. The certainty in his voice was undeniable. Camilla was torn between believing him and fearing him even more. The large sedan descended into a concrete underground garage, lit by harsh fluorescent lights and watched by security cameras at every angle. Armed men dressed in dark tactical gear stood like statues, their eyes following the car's every move. The driver brought the vehicle to a smooth stop, and one of the guards immediately opened Camilla's door. For a moment, she could not move. Damien got out of the car and walked around to her side, crouching down to meet her children at their level. You are completely safe here, he told them in a quiet, steady voice. No one is going to hurt you anymore. The little girl peered out from under his heavy jacket, which was still draped over her small shoulders. She studied his face with enormous, wary eyes. Do you promise? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Damien's jaw muscle clenched. For just a second, a flicker of raw humanity crossed his hardened features. I promise. The boy observed him intently and then gave a single decisive nod. It was a child's instinct, an ability to read danger and true intention. He had learned to survive by knowing precisely who to fear and who to trust. And for some reason, he trusted this imposing stranger. Camilla could not comprehend it, but she did not resist when Damien extended his hand to her. She took it and climbed out of the car, her bare feet meeting the cold concrete. Her children immediately pressed against her sides. This way, Damien said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He led them into a private elevator with steel walls. There were no visible buttons, only a biometric scanner glowing softly. Damien pressed his thumb against the glass panel, and the doors slid shut with a quiet hiss. The ascent was completely silent. When the doors opened again, Camilla found herself stepping into a penthouse apartment that seemed to have been pulled from the pages of a luxury magazine. Vast floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a stunning view of the rain-soaked city below. The furniture was sleek and minimalist, made of dark wood. Everything was expensive, precise, and perfectly controlled. It felt like she had entered an entirely different reality. The bathrooms are through there, Damien stated, gesturing down a long hallway. Get them cleaned up. You will find clothes in the closets. Just find something that fits all of you. Camilla remained frozen in place, completely overwhelmed by the situation. I do not understand any of this, she said. Why are you helping us? Damien paused with his back still turned to her. He did not answer for a long, heavy moment. When he finally did speak, his voice was quiet and seemed to come from a great distance. Because someone should have done this for her. Her? But he offered no further explanation. He just walked over to the kitchen and opened the large stainless steel refrigerator. Camilla stood and watched as he methodically took out food. He placed bread, cheese, fresh fruit, and a carton of milk on the stone countertop with deliberate precision. There was no wasted motion, no sign of hesitation at all. He noticed her children were staring, so he gestured toward the dining table. "Sit down." The boy scrambled onto a chair, his eyes fixed on the food as if he could not believe it was actually real. The girl, however, remained glued to Camilla's leg. Damien poured milk into 2 tall glasses, set them on the table, and then took a step back. He did not hover over them or rush them. He simply waited. The boy reached for a piece of bread, his movement slow and cautious at first, but it grew faster when nobody tried to stop him. Damien watched them eat with an expression that Camilla found impossible to decipher. It looked like a deep rage simmering just beneath a surface of absolute control. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He did not turn to look at her. "Do not thank me yet." In that moment, Camilla understood with a chilling clarity that this was not an act of charity. This was a strategic move. Damian Rios had just claimed them as his own, and in his world, a claim like that meant war was coming. Camilla awoke to bright sunlight slicing through the windows of an unfamiliar room. For one bewildering moment, she had no memory of where she was. The bed she lay in was far too soft, the sheets were impossibly clean, and the silence was too profound. Then the memories came crashing back. The dark alley, the cold rain, the imposing man in the black suit. She shot upright in bed, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. Her children. She kicked off the heavy blanket and stumbled out of the room, her bare feet silent on the polished hardwood floors. The massive penthouse stretched out before her in the morning light. It was vast, immaculate, and completely empty. A wave of panic began to claw its way up her throat. "Maya and Luca are in the next room." Camilla spun around at the sound of his voice. Damien was standing in the kitchen, already perfectly dressed despite the early hour. He wore black pants and a crisp white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing more of the intricate tattoos that covered his forearms. He held a coffee cup with that same measured precision he applied to every single thing he did. "You let me sleep," Camilla said, her voice filled with accusation. "You needed to rest. I need to see my children. Now." Damien gestured toward the hallway with his coffee cup. "It is the second door on the left." Camilla moved as quickly as she could, her legs still feeling weak from exhaustion. She pushed the door open and stopped dead in her tracks. Maya and Luca were sitting at a small table near the window. They were dressed in clean, soft pajamas that actually fit them perfectly. Maya's hair had been brushed and was pulled back with a small clip that Camilla had never seen before. Luca was wearing socks. Both of them were eating breakfast. It was a real breakfast, with eggs, toast, and slices of fruit. A woman who appeared to be in her 50s stood nearby. She had gray hair pulled back into a tidy bun and kind, observant eyes. She had the calm demeanor of a nurse. The woman looked up as Camilla came into the room. "They are perfectly fine," the woman said in a gentle voice. "My name is Dr. Reina. Mr. Rios asked me to come and check on them. You examined my children without my permission." Camilla's voice was shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "Mom." Luca looked up from his plate, and pure relief washed over his face. "We are okay. She was really nice to us." Maya slid down from her chair and ran to Camilla, wrapping her small arms tightly around her mother's waist. "You were sleeping. The man said we should not wake you up." Camilla hugged her daughter tightly, her mind reeling as she tried to process everything. A doctor, clean clothes, real food. "They are both malnourished," Dr. Reina stated in a matter-of-fact tone. "But it is nothing that proper nutrition will not be able to fix. The boy is suffering from mild dehydration. The girl had the early signs of frostbite on her toes, but we managed to catch it just in time." She carefully packed her medical supplies back into a black bag. "I will come back to check on them again tomorrow." I did not agree to any of this, Camilla said, her voice still trembling. Dr. Reyna met her gaze with a surprising firmness. Would you have preferred that I had not come? Camilla opened her mouth to argue, but then she closed it. The doctor's expression softened just a little. Mr. Rios takes very good care of his people. You will learn that soon enough. She picked up her bag. Make sure they eat something every few hours. Give them small portions. You do not want to overwhelm their stomachs. She left the room without waiting for a reply. Camilla sank down into the chair beside Luca, pulling Maya onto her lap. Her children were safe, they were fed, and they were clean. It felt like a beautiful dream that she was terrified of waking up from. Where is the man? Luca asked, putting another forkful of eggs into his mouth. His name is Damien, Maya corrected him. That is his name. He told me himself. A knot of anxiety tightened in Camilla's chest. He had told them his name. He had spoken to them while she was asleep. That thought alone should have filled her with terror. But as she watched her son eat, with actual color finally returning to his cheeks, it was difficult to feel anything other than overwhelming relief. Finish your breakfast, she told them quietly. She found Damien standing on the balcony. He was at the railing, gazing out at the sprawling city below him, a view from 50 floors of power and immense distance. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening in the morning sun. He did not turn around as she approached him. You had a doctor examine my children without even asking me, Camilla stated. You gave them new clothes. You fed them. Yes, he replied. Why would you do that? Damien's jaw tightened. Because they needed it. That is not a real answer. He finally turned to face her, and his dark, intense eyes settled on her with an uncomfortable weight. What is it that you want me to say? That I did it because I am kind? That I am some kind of hero? His voice remained perfectly level, but she could sense something dangerous simmering just beneath the surface. I am not a hero. I have done things in my life that would make you lock your children in a room to keep them away from me. Camilla held his intense gaze without flinching. Then why did you help us? For a long moment, she was certain he would not answer her. Then he looked back out at the city. I have one single rule that I never, ever break, he said quietly. No children get hurt on my streets. Not inside my territory. Not while I have the power to stop it from happening. His hands gripped the metal railing tightly. The men who were hunting you broke that rule. They believed they could operate here without facing any consequences. So this is just about your territory, about your control. This is about drawing a line in the sand. Camilla stepped closer to him, studying his profile. What happened to you? His expression immediately hardened. That is nothing you need to know about. Yesterday you said someone should have done it for her. Who were you talking about? Damien's knuckles turned white as he gripped the railing. My sister. The two words fell between them like heavy stones. Camilla waited for him to continue. She was 12 years old, Damien went on, his voice completely empty of any emotion. It was the kind of emptiness that comes from replaying a story too many times inside your own head. I was 16, and I was working 2 jobs just trying to keep us fed after our parents died. He exhaled a long, slow breath. One afternoon, I came home from work and she was gone. Just vanished. Camilla's throat felt tight. No one helped me, Damien said. Nobody cared. We were just 2 orphan kids living in the East District. To everyone else, we were completely invisible. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscles working. I searched for her for 3 years. I called every single number. I checked every possible lead, and I found absolutely nothing. I am so sorry, Camilla whispered. Do not be, he said as he turned to face her fully. I built all of this so that no one else would ever have to feel that helpless again. So now when I see children who are in danger, I do not ask questions. I do not wait around hoping for someone else to care. His eyes seemed to burn with a cold, unforgiving fire. I act. At that moment, Camilla finally understood. This was not charity. This was not even simple kindness. This was his penance. Your children are not your sister, she told him gently. I know that. Damien's voice softened just a fraction, but maybe saving them means that she did not disappear for nothing. Behind them, visible through the large glass doors, Maya's that laugh was a bright, pure sound, so full of life it felt out of place. For a brief moment, Damien's entire expression softened. Something that resembled peace flickered across his features before the mask of control slammed back down. He spoke, his tone once again all business. There are guards posted outside the door. He leveled his gaze at her. You will not leave this floor without me or one of my men. Is that understood? Camilla's heart hammered. Are we your prisoners? You are protected. His eyes held hers, daring her to challenge him. There is a significant difference. She wanted to scream, to grab her children and flee into the night, but when she looked down at the sprawling, indifferent city, she saw only shadows full of men who wanted to harm her family. She looked back at Damien, a devil she was beginning to know, and chose him over the monsters she did not. How long will this last? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Until the threat has been completely eliminated. And after that? Damien's face remained a perfect, unreadable blank. Then you will be free to leave. But a shadow in his voice made it clear he did not believe she ever would. For the next 3 days, they lived in that penthouse, suspended in time like figures inside a glass snow globe. It was beautiful, perfectly self-contained, and completely cut off from the real world. Camilla watched as her children began to heal before her very eyes. A healthy color slowly returned to their pale cheeks. Luca no longer jumped at every sudden noise, and Maya laughed, a genuine joyful sound, when Damien's kind housekeeper presented her with a fluffy stuffed rabbit from the toy store located in the building's lobby. Still, Camilla could not escape the constant, unnerving feeling that she was simply waiting for the fragile glass of their sanctuary to shatter into a million pieces. She only ever saw Damien in brief, fleeting moments. He would leave in the early mornings, already speaking into the phone pressed to his ear, dressed in perfectly tailored suits. He would return late in the night, the tension rolling off of him in palpable waves, like heat rising from pavement. He never once joined them for a meal. He never lingered in a room for a second longer than was absolutely necessary. But she started to notice the little things. She saw the way he would pause just outside the children's bedroom door every single night, just listening to them breathe. She found brand new children's books left on the coffee table. She observed how his guards rotated their shifts with a soldier's precision, their eyes always fixed on the elevator, the stairwell, and the massive windows. He was waiting for something to happen. On the 4th morning, Camilla discovered him standing before the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles had turned completely white. "What is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with dread. Damien did not bother to turn around. They finally made their move. The floor seemed to fall away beneath her feet. Who did? The men who are hunting us? His voice was a weapon, cold, controlled, and utterly lethal. They attacked one of my warehouses last night. They burned the entire structure to the ground. Camilla felt the air leave her lungs. But why would they do that? Because you are here. He finally turned to face her, and the raw fury burning in his eyes made her instinctively take a step back. They are sending me a very clear message. Either I give you up, or they will continue to escalate. Then you have to give me up, Camilla said without a moment's hesitation. I will not be the reason people are dying. No. The single word was as sharp and final as a knife's edge. You do not understand what is happening, Camilla pressed on, her voice shaking. If they are willing to destroy your property, they will not stop. They will hurt innocent people, and it will all be because of me and my children. They hurt people, Damien interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. because they are savage animals who believe that real power means they can do whatever they want without ever facing consequences. He took a deliberate step toward her. This is not about you anymore. This is about them crossing boundaries that they never should have even approached. But people could die because of this. People will die, Damien stated with chilling certainty. But it will not be you, it will not be your children, and it will not be anyone who is under my protection. Camilla could only stare at him, struggling to see how the man who had given Maya a stuffed rabbit could also be the man promising death with such calm finality. How can you be so, she trailed off, searching for the right word. So cold about all of this? A flicker of something unreadable crossed Damien's face. It was not quite pain, and not quite regret. Because if I am not cold, then I am completely useless. He turned his back to her, looking out at the city again. Emotion causes you to hesitate, and hesitation is what gets people killed. Is that what happened with your sister? Did you hesitate? The temperature in the opulent room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Damien's shoulders went rigid, every muscle in his back tightening like steel cables beneath the fine fabric of his suit. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low it was almost a whisper. I was 16 years old, working a double shift at a diner. She called me. She said someone was following her on her way home from school. His jaw tightened with the memory. I told her to run inside and lock all the doors, that I would be there in 20 minutes. Camilla felt a crushing weight settle in her chest. I was 23 minutes late, Damien continued, his voice hollow. When I finally arrived, the front door was hanging wide open, and she was gone. He turned to face her again, and the profound emptiness in his eyes was far more terrifying than any rage. So no, I did not hesitate. I just was not fast enough. Damien, I will not make that same mistake ever again. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers moving with a controlled, deadly precision, which is exactly why I am going to end this today. What are you planning to do? What I should have done the very second they dared to enter my territory. He dialed a number and pressed the phone firmly to his ear. I want you to gather the names. Every single associate, every business front, every bank account they have touched in this city. There was a short pause. I want them completely isolated by noon. He disconnected the call without another word. Camilla's stomach felt like it was full of ice. You are going after them. I am removing a problem from my city by systematically destroying their lives, by showing them precisely what happens when you threaten what is mine. The weight of that possessive word hung in the silent air between them. Camilla opened her mouth to speak, but a slight movement behind her caused her to turn. Luca was standing in the hallway, his pajamas rumpled and his dark hair sticking up in every direction, his eyes wide with fear. Is someone coming to get us? He asked, his voice a small, quiet thing. Damien's expression instantly changed, the cold, hard mask cracking just enough to show the man beneath. He swiftly crossed the room and knelt down, bringing himself to Luca's eye level. It was the exact same way he had knelt in the alley that first terrible night. Yes, he answered simply. There were no lies, no false reassurances. Luca's small chin began to tremble. Are they going to take us away? No. How can you know for sure? Damien's large, tattooed hand came to rest gently on the boy's trembling shoulder. Because I am not going to let them. Do you promise? For a long, silent moment, Damien just looked at the child, this small boy who had learned far too young that the world was a dangerous place, that adults could not always be trusted, and that promises were meaningless when powerful men wanted something. I promise, Damien finally said, his voice soft. Luca carefully studied his face with the intense scrutiny of a child who had been lied to many times before. Then, slowly, he gave a single trusting nod. Okay. Damien rose to his full height, and Camilla saw a new look in his expression. It was not just determination, and it was not just rage. It was a profound sense of purpose. The phone in Damien's pocket buzzed loudly. He pulled it out, read the text message on the screen, and his face became a completely blank slate. "What is it?" Camilla asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "They just grabbed one of my top distributors right off the street. They left him beaten in front of my downtown club." His voice was pure ice. "They are deliberately escalating." "So what do we do now?" Damien's intense eyes met hers. In that instant, she saw him transform. The man who bought her daughter toys vanished, and in his place stood the ruthless figure the entire city feared. "Now I am going to remind them precisely why people do not challenge me." He made 3 phone calls, one right after the other. Each conversation was brutally short, each one delivering a final command. By the time he hung up the last call, Camilla could almost see the gears turning in his mind. Strategies were forming, resources were being deployed, and consequences were being calculated with cold precision. "Stay here," he commanded. "Do not open the door for anyone except my head of security. His name is—" She recognized Jules instantly. He was a tall man, defined by the thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His clothing was always some shade of gray. "Where are you planning to go?" Damien's fingers moved with an expert's calm, adjusting the links on his cuffs. "I am going to establish a boundary they will never be allowed to cross." "And what happens if they ignore it?" A smile formed on his lips, so cold it could turn water to ice. "Then they will discover the consequences of touching something that belongs to Damien Rios." He turned and started walking toward the elevator. In that moment, Camilla understood with a chilling certainty that this man, their savior, had no intention of talking. He was marching into a war, and her children were the reason for it. Damien did not come home that night. Camilla remained at the window, staring out as the city's lights melted into a blur behind the rain that began its downpour just after midnight. Down the hallway, Maya and Luca were finally asleep in their room, their breathing even and deep after she had read their favorite story to them 3 separate times. But rest was impossible for her. The image of Damien's face just before he departed was burned into her mind. It was cold, determined, and absolutely terrifying. She could only sit and wonder what terrible things he was doing out there in the darkness of the city. The next morning, the sound of the elevator chiming broke the silence. Camilla shot to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. A wave of relief washed over her when Jules, the head of security Damien had mentioned, stepped out first. He was tall, just as described, with a noticeable scar just over his left eye. His face was a mask of professional neutrality. Right behind him was Damien. He looked as if he had just walked directly through hell itself and had set it ablaze on his way back. His once pristine white shirt was now ruined. Dark splotches she refused to identify stained the collar and the sleeves. His knuckles were swollen and bruised, the skin split open across 2 of them. His hair, which was usually styled with perfect control, now fell messily across his forehead. But it was his eyes that were the most disturbing. They were completely vacant, haunted by something terrible, as if he had just witnessed something that confirmed every dark suspicion he had ever harbored about himself. "Sir," Jules began in a low voice, "you really should let me handle this." "I am fine," Damien said, cutting him off abruptly. "You need to check the entire perimeter. I want to be certain we were not followed here." Jules paused for a moment, then gave a single nod and vanished back into the elevator. Damien just stood there in the middle of his own opulent penthouse, looking like a man who had forgotten how he had even arrived. Camilla moved across the vast room with deliberate slowness, the same way a person might approach a creature that was both wounded and extremely dangerous. "Are you injured?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "No. But your hands. I already told you, I am fine." He walked right past her, heading for the kitchen. With fingers that trembled slightly, he pulled a bottle of expensive whiskey from a high cabinet. He poured a generous 3 fingers worth of the amber liquid into a heavy glass, downed it in a single desperate gulp, and immediately poured another. Camilla just stood there, watching him. What exactly did you do? Damien just stared down into his glass. I did what had to be done. That is not a real answer. It is the only answer you will ever get from me. She knew she should have just left him alone. She should have gone back to her room, locked her door, and pretended that she did not care what this man had unleashed in her name. Yet, something about the way he stood there, his shoulders rigid with tension and his breathing so carefully controlled as if he were holding himself together by sheer force of will, compelled her to stay. You are not fine, she stated softly. I am still breathing. That is fine enough. Damien, please do not do this. The word came out of her mouth sharp and fractured. He slammed the glass down on the counter with too much force, causing the whiskey to slosh over the rim. Do not try to make me feel any better about the man I am, or the things that I do. I am not trying to do that at all. You ought to be terrified of me. He finally turned to face her, and the raw, unfiltered agony in his expression stole the air from her lungs. Do you truly understand what I am telling you? I have just spent the last 6 hours systematically taking apart people's lives. I cut off their access to money, I destroyed their connections, and I sealed all of their escape routes. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. And when one of them made the foolish decision to run, I made certain he understood exactly what happens when you threaten something that is mine. There it was again, that possessive word. Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. Did you kill him? She whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Damien's jaw tightened. No. Then what did you do? I made him wish that I had. He lifted the glass again but did not take a drink this time. He just stared at it. I am not a good man, Camilla. I do not rescue people because it is the morally right thing to do. I do it because I was unable to save her. And now, every single time I see a child who is in danger, I see her face. His sister. Camilla had always suspected there was a deeper story there. There was more pain hidden beneath that cold, unforgiving exterior. What was her name? She asked him, her voice gentle. For a long, silent moment, she was certain he was going to ignore her question. Then, he finally spoke. Isabella. The name seemed to hang in the silent room like a whispered prayer. Please tell me about her, Camilla said. Why should I? Because you are carrying this burden all by yourself, and it is far too heavy for one person to bear. Damien's hands gripped the glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. She expected him to refuse. She thought he would shut down entirely, retreating back behind his walls of ice. But instead, something inside of him finally fractured. She was all the goodness in the world that I was not, he said, his voice quiet and thick with memory. She was brilliant and kind. She had dreams of becoming a teacher. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped him. She used to practice her lessons on me. She would make me sit still for hours while she talked about history and science, as if I cared about anything in the world except finding a way to keep us fed. Camilla took a careful step closer. You were only 16 years old. You were just a child, too. I was old enough to keep her safe. His voice became harsh and filled with self-loathing, old enough to understand that the East District devoured kids like us. That monsters like the ones hunting you are everywhere, always searching for vulnerable children that nobody would ever miss. You said before that someone was following her. Damien squeezed his eyes shut. She called me. She was at a payphone, only 3 blocks away from our apartment. She told me that a man driving a van had been circling her school all day. She said it had followed her bus. His voice broke completely. She was so scared. And I told her to just run straight home and lock all the doors. I told her I would be there in 20 minutes. Damien. 23 minutes. He went on, the words now tumbling from his mouth like a poison he had held inside for far too many years. I was 23 minutes late. I had to run 8 blocks because I did not have the money for the bus fare. By the time I finally reached our apartment, The door was broken and kicked in. Her little backpack was just lying on the floor. Her shoe, just a single one of her shoes, was sitting in the middle of the hallway. A fire burned in Camilla's throat. "I looked for her for 3 years," Damien said. "I followed every single lead, chased down every rumor, and infiltrated every trafficking ring I could possibly find." His hands began to shake uncontrollably. "I became the man I am today because I needed the power to tear this entire world apart. The world that stole her from me. I needed the connections, the money, the ability to inspire fear." He finally opened his eyes, and they were bleak. "And it was all completely for nothing, because she is still gone. You do not know for certain that she is dead." He laughed, but the sound was broken and hollow. "I know. I know exactly what happens to 12-year-old girls who vanish without a trace in this city. I have taken down enough of those operations to guarantee I will have nightmares for the rest of my life." Camilla moved closer to him. She was now close enough to see the profound grief that was etched into every single line on his face. "So that is the reason," she whispered in understanding. "Maya and Luca, they are not just children to you. They are every child I failed to save." Damien's voice cracked under the weight of his confession. "Every single face I have seen in every case file, every name on every heartbreaking list." He looked directly at her then, and the raw pain shining in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "I can never bring Isabella back. But I will be damned if I let anyone else lose their sister, or their daughter, or their son. Even if it completely destroys you? I was already destroyed on the day that she disappeared." He carefully set the glass down on the counter. "Everything I have done since that day has just been an attempt to build something useful out of the wreckage." Camilla then did something she knew she should not do. It was something reckless and foolish, but in that moment, it felt completely necessary. She reached out her hand and took his, the one with the bruised knuckles and the faded, tattooed scars, and she held it tightly in her own. "You are not wreckage," she said with a firm, unwavering voice. "You are the man who saved my children when nobody else in the world was willing to help." Damien stared down at their joined hands as if he had completely forgotten what human comfort felt like. "They are safe for tonight," he said, his voice much quieter now. "The men who were hunting you will not be making another move, not for a while at least. Because of what you did to them. Yes." By all rights, Camila should have been horrified. She should have pulled her hand away from this man who had just admitted to ruining people's lives without a shred of hesitation. Instead, she just squeezed his hand even tighter. "Thank you," she whispered to him. And for the very first time since she had met him, the formidable Damian Rios looked as if he might actually believe he deserved her gratitude. They experienced 4 nights of a very fragile peace, 4 nights during which Camilla almost allowed herself to think that the long nightmare had finally come to an end. 4 nights where Maya's laughter filled the apartment during breakfast, and Luca asked endless questions about the towering buildings he could see from the penthouse windows. 4 nights where Damien came home each evening with freshly bruised knuckles and profoundly exhausted eyes, but always made a point to pause and check on the sleeping children. He would do this before he vanished into the solitude of his office. They had 4 nights of pretending that the strong glass walls surrounding them were enough to hold back the world. On the 5th night, those walls completely shattered. Camilla woke up to an oppressive darkness and a deep silence, the kind of absolute quiet that felt fundamentally wrong. There was no gentle hum from the city traffic far below, no soft ambient light spilling in from the hallway. Even the bright digital clock that usually sat on her nightstand was completely black. It must be a power outage. She sat up in her bed slowly, her survival instincts screaming at her long before her conscious mind could catch up. Her hand automatically reached out for her phone on the nightstand. It was dead. The battery was completely drained, even though it had been at 60% charge when she had gone to sleep. This was not a simple outage, it was a deliberate shutdown. A bolt of pure terror shot through Camilla. She threw the covers off and ran as fast as she could toward the children's room, her bare feet cold against the polished floors. The penthouse was plunged into absolute darkness. There were no emergency lights, no backup power systems, nothing at all. Maya, Luca. She burst right through their bedroom door and nearly collapsed with overwhelming relief. Both of her children were sitting up in their beds, Maya clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit tightly, and Luca's eyes were wide with fear in the gloom. "Mom?" Luca's voice was a terrified whisper in the dark. "It is all right, my sweet boy. Come to me." Camilla gathered them into her arms, her heart pounding against her ribs, while her mind screamed a single question. Where was Damien? Where were the guards he promised would always be here? This penthouse was supposed to be a fortress, protected by military-grade security systems. The power could not have just failed on its own. A sharp sound from the hallway confirmed her worst fears. The distinct thud of tactical boots, several pairs, moving with a chilling, synchronized precision. These were not Damien's men. A cold dread seized Camilla. She frantically scanned the darkened room, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon. A heavy table lamp, a solid wooden chair, anything at all. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then a voice sliced through the silence from the living room. It was male, icy, and horribly familiar from the nightmares she fought so hard to escape. He said, "Check every single room. I know they are in here somewhere." It was them. The men from the alley. The monsters who had been stalking her children for weeks. They had finally found their way inside. Camilla clamped her hand gently over Maya's mouth to stifle a whimper, guiding both children silently toward the large walk-in closet. Her hands trembled violently as she pushed them inside, her own voice a desperate, frantic whisper. "Do not make a single sound. No matter what you hear, you must stay hidden." The bedroom door didn't open. It splintered from its frame, crashing inward. A blinding beam from a powerful flashlight sliced through the oppressive darkness, forcing her to squint. Instinct took over as Camilla threw herself in front of the children, making her own body a shield against the three intruders who filled the doorway. "There you are," the man in the lead sneered. His tall, thin frame was topped with a face marred by a long scar that pulled at his cheek. "Did you really think you could hide forever in Rios's golden castle?" "Stay away from us," Camilla warned, the words barely escaping her throat through a wave of terror. The man let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Or what? Are you going to scream for help? Feel free. Your boyfriend's entire security team is taking a nap 3 floors below us. As for Rios, he is currently occupied with a very convenient fire that just broke out at his property on the east side." He took another deliberate step closer. That is the fundamental problem with powerful men like him. They believe they can protect everything they own, but they simply cannot be everywhere at the same time. "Please," Camilla begged, her voice a raw whisper. "Just let us leave." "We will," he said. "The children, at least. They are worth a considerable amount of money." His smile was pure cruelty. "You, however, have been nothing but an expensive problem for us." He lifted his hand slowly, and in the wavering light, Camilla saw the cold, unmistakable glint of steel. It was a pistol. In that moment, time seemed to stretch and slow to a crawl. Her thoughts flashed to Maya and Luca cowering behind her. She saw the new life she had fought tooth and nail to give them, a life of safety. She thought of the powerful man who had sworn they would never be harmed again. Then the massive window on the far wall did not just break, it exploded. Shards of glass flew inward as a dark figure launched through the opening from the balcony, moving with an impossible speed and a terrifying fluid control. The flashlight tumbled from an attacker's hand, spinning across the polished floor, its beam catching fractured glimpses of motion. A perfectly tailored black suit, hands covered in intricate tattoos. Cold, unrestrained fury was etched into every hard line of Damien Rios's face. He moved like a storm, like violence had been given a human form. The first intruder collapsed with a sickening crack as Damien's elbow slammed into his jaw with brutal force. The second man fumbled to raise his weapon, but Damien was already on him, seizing his wrist and twisting it with expert precision until the gun clattered uselessly to the floor. A powerful knee strike to the man's ribs was followed by a vicious chop to his throat. He crumpled, his breath catching in ragged, choking gasps. The leader, the man with the scar, reacted by grabbing Camilla, brutally yanking her in front of him like a human shield, pressing the cold barrel of his gun hard against her temple. "Stop right there!" he screamed, his voice laced with panic. "Stop, or I swear I will kill her." Damian Rios froze. In the chaotic, sweeping beam of the fallen flashlight, Camilla saw the look on Damien's face. It was not fear. It was not even hesitation. It was a look of pure, calculated, and absolute rage. "Let her go," Damien said, his voice dangerously quiet. The tone itself was a threat. "You back away now," the man ordered, his own voice trembling. "You get back, or she is dead." From the darkness behind Camilla, Maya let out a small, terrified whimper. The sound cut through the tense standoff like a razor's edge. For a fraction of a second, Damien's gaze flickered to the closet door, where he knew the children were hiding. Then his eyes locked back onto the man holding Camilla hostage. "You made a grave mistake by coming into this home," Damien stated, his voice flat. "I made a mistake?" The man's laugh was sharp and nervous, pushing the gun even harder against Camilla's skull. "You are the one who made the mistake, Rios." In the next instant, Damien moved. One moment, he stood 10 feet away across the room. The very next, he was right there, his hand of vice gripping the man's wrist with crushing strength, wrenching the firearm away from Camilla's head. The weapon fired with a deafening roar, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the plaster ceiling. Camilla fell to the floor, and Damien instantly became a wall between her and her attacker. What followed was a blur of motion that took less than 5 seconds to unfold. A precise strike to the elbow that shattered the bone with an audible snap. A powerful leg sweep that knocked the man completely off his feet. Damien descended with him, landing with a knee planted firmly on his chest and a powerful forearm pressed across his throat, cutting off his air. "You put a firearm to her head," Damien said, and his voice was utterly devoid of emotion, except for the chilling certainty of a promise being kept. "You did it in my home, near the children who are under my protection." The man beneath him struggled, his breath turning into strangled chokes. "I warned you what the consequences would be if you ever touched them." "Wait," the man gasped, his eyes wide with terror. "Wait, please, I am begging you." Damien leaned in closer, his face obscured by shadow, but Camilla heard his final words, spoken softly, like a eulogy. "You do not get to beg." The pressure from his arm increased steadily. The man's desperate struggles grew weaker, then weaker still, until they ceased completely. Damien rose to his feet slowly, taking a single step back from the body. The man on the floor did not move. Camilla could not be sure if he was merely unconscious or something far worse. A dark part of her realized she did not want to know the answer. The bedroom door suddenly burst open again. This time it was Jules, followed by 4 of Damien's guards, all with their weapons drawn, their own flashlights slicing through the gloom. "Sir," Jules began. "Secure all of them," Damien commanded, his voice instantly shifting back to one of cold, absolute control. "I want a full report on how they breached this building. I want the names of every single person involved, and I want our backup systems fully online within the next 5 minutes." "Yes, sir," Jules responded without hesitation. Damien finally turned his attention to Camilla, and in the intersecting flashlight beams, she could clearly see the blood smeared across his knuckles. "Are you injured?" he asked. She could only shake her head, the words stuck in her throat. "The children. I am here." Luca was the first to emerge from the closet, carefully pulling a trembling Maya along with him. Both of their small faces were pale, their eyes wide with a terror that tore at Camilla's heart. Damien crossed the room in 3 long strides, sinking to one knee in front of them, his large frame a stark contrast to their smallness, the raw violence of the last few minutes still clinging to him like a shroud. "You are safe now," he said to them, his voice incredibly quiet and gentle. "I give you my word, you are safe." Maya finally broke, bursting into tears as she threw herself at him. Damien caught her with an instinct that seemed completely natural, and for a long moment, he just held her, this small, terrified little girl, while his men efficiently dragged the unconscious intruders out of the room. Luca hesitated for only a second before stepping closer, wrapping his own small arms tightly around Damien's neck. And Damien Rios, the man who the entire city feared, the man who had just dismantled 3 armed attackers without a flicker of hesitation, simply closed his eyes and held both children as if they were the only precious things left in the entire world worth protecting. Watching them through her own tears, Camilla finally understood. This was no longer just about strategy or protection. This was family. That night's assault changed the very air in the penthouse. Damien had the entire residence swept for vulnerabilities, not once, but 3 separate times. He implemented entirely new security protocols, installing biometric locks on every door and window, and stationed guards on the floor itself, not just in the building's main lobby. He moved through their home like a general preparing for war, meticulously checking every angle, identifying structural reinforcement points, and mapping out potential escape routes. Camilla observed him, her heart caught between overwhelming gratitude and a growing sense of deep unease. In the days that followed, he barely slept and hardly ate. Whenever he looked at her children, a fierce, almost predatory possessiveness burned in his eyes that made her own chest feel tight with an unnameable emotion. On the second day after the attack, he summoned her to his office. "Sit down," he commanded, his eyes fixed on the tablet computer in his hands. Camilla took a seat in the chair across from his massive desk, studying his profile in the warm afternoon light. The bruises coloring his knuckles had deepened to a dark, angry purple. She noticed a fresh cut above his eyebrow that certainly had not been there before the attack. He looked as if he had aged a decade in just 48 hours. "We have to talk," Damien said at last, finally placing the tablet on his desk. A knot of dread formed in her stomach. Talk about what? About putting an end to this entire situation. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes unwavering and firm. Camilla's hands gripped the armrests of her chair until her knuckles turned white. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means that for too long, I have been playing defense, simply reacting to their actions instead of controlling the entire game." His voice was as cold and hard as steel. "That strategy ends today. The men who came here were not independent operators. They are merely soldiers in a much larger network, a trafficking operation that extends across 3 states, all of it run by a man named Klov. He is Russian, extremely well-connected, and completely ruthless." Damien then called up a photograph on his tablet and turned the screen so she could see it. "He has been aggressively trying to move into my territory for the last several months. Your children were targeted as leverage, a way to force me to the negotiating table." Camilla stared down at the image of a man in his 50s, with sleek gray hair and an expensive suit. His cold, lifeless eyes reminded her of a great white shark. "So," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "what are you going to do about him?" "I am going to have a meeting with him." Her blood turned to ice in her veins. "That is completely insane. He will have you killed." "He will certainly try," Damien replied, his stoic expression not changing in the slightest. "But I assure you, he will not succeed. How can you possibly be so certain of that?" "Because I am," he answered simply. He rose from his chair and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling city below. "Klov's entire empire is built on fear and intimidation. He mistakenly believes that I am vulnerable because I have shown that I care about protecting your children. He thinks that my compassion makes me weak." "It does not make you weak," she insisted. "He is about to learn the critical difference between weakness and restraint," Damien said, turning back to face her. I have been holding back my full strength because launching an all-out war would have put you and the children in even greater danger. But after what they did 2 nights ago, there is no more holding back. Camilla stood as well, crossing the room to stand before him. So your plan is to just walk into a meeting with a man who has made it clear he wants you dead? It is not just a meeting. Something dangerous and unsettling flickered deep in his eyes. I am going directly into his territory, to the shipping docks on the east side. It is the place where he feels the most secure, where he believes he controls absolutely everything. That is not a strategy. That is suicide. It is strategy, Damien corrected her, his voice softening just a fraction. He needs to be made to understand that nowhere is safe for him if he continues to threaten what belongs to me. Not his warehouses, not his criminal operations, and not even the heart of his own territory. And what if something goes wrong? What if he does kill you? Then Jules has his explicit instructions. He will get you and the children out of this city immediately. You will be given new identities, clean financial accounts, and a full protection detail until you are settled somewhere completely safe. He spoke about it with such a calm, matter-of-fact tone, as if he had already made peace with his own death as a potential outcome. I do not want your contingency plan, Camilla said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. I want you to not go through with this. I have to do this. Why? She pleaded. Why does it have to be you who walks into the fire? Damien remained silent for a long, heavy moment. When he finally spoke again, his voice was burdened with the immense weight of years of unresolved grief. Because I was not able to protect Isabella, he said softly. But I can protect them. He gestured toward the living room, where the faint sounds of Maya and Luca drawing with the new crayons Damien had bought for them could be heard. And if protecting them means I have to walk directly into hell to guarantee they will never have to look over their shoulders in fear again, then that is what I am going to do. Camilla felt hot tears begin to burn her eyes, understanding the depth of his pain and the strength of his promise. You do not have the responsibility to save every single person. Perhaps not. He met her gaze directly. But I do have the responsibility to save them. The rain began to fall again later that night, drumming a steady rhythm against the massive windows like a somber funeral march. Damien prepared himself with a methodical and practiced calm. He put on a clean suit, solid black, with no tie. He checked his weapon and holstered it securely at the small of his back. He had a dedicated phone with a direct, encrypted line to Jules. He moved with the quiet precision of a man who had performed this ritual 1,000 times before. Camilla found him in the hallway just as he was about to depart. "Wait!" she called out to him. He turned to face her. She had no idea what she truly wanted to say. "Do not go. Please come back safely. We need you here." All of those sentiments felt completely inadequate for the gravity of the moment. Instead of speaking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. Damien's entire body went rigid with surprise. For a long second, he did not move at all. Then, very slowly, his own arms came up to encircle her, his touch careful and gentle, as if he were afraid of breaking something incredibly precious. "Thank you," Camilla whispered against the solid wall of his chest. "For every single thing you have done for us." His voice was a low rumble when he replied, "Do not thank me until after this is over." She pulled back just enough to look directly into his face. "Promise me that you will come back." "I cannot make that promise." "Then just promise me that you will try." Something shifted deep within his expression, like a flicker of hope attempting to grow in scorched earth. "I will try," he said, his voice surprisingly quiet. He took a step back from her. She watched him walk to the elevator, watched the heavy doors slide shut, watched the floor numbers descend until he was gone. The sprawling shipping dock stretched out along the waterfront, a dark graveyard of steel and rust. A steady rain was falling, turning every surface slick and treacherous. Puddles mirrored the weak glow of the sparse industrial lights, which did little to pierce the oppressive darkness. Towering cargo containers were stacked like massive building blocks, creating a confusing maze of deep shadows and hidden corners. Damien's black sedan pulled up to the agreed-upon meeting point, a vast, empty warehouse situated at the far end of the docks, completely isolated from the active shipping lanes. It was a strategic, defensible location, precisely the kind of place a person chose when they wanted to maintain absolute control. Jules shifted nervously in the driver's seat. "Sir, we have tactical teams positioned at 3 separate entry points. Just give the word." "No," Damien cut him off sharply. "I am going in alone." "Sir, with all due respect, that is a mistake. It is a message." Damien performed a final check of his weapon. "Claude needs to see with his own eyes that I am not afraid of him. He needs to know that I do not require an army to face him down." "And what if this is a trap?" "It is definitely a trap." Damien pushed the car door open. The cold rain immediately began to soak his shoulders. "But it is my trap, too." He started walking toward the warehouse entrance, the rain sliding down his face, each step measured and deliberate. The massive doors stood wide open. It was either an invitation or a threat, but it made no difference to him. He crossed the threshold into the dim light of the cavernous space, his eyes adjusting to the concrete floors. Claude was waiting in the exact center of the warehouse, flanked by 6 of his men, all of them with their weapons clearly visible. The Russian looked exactly as he had in his photograph. He wore an expensive suit, his eyes were as cold as a winter sky, and he possessed the kind of unnatural calm that only comes from decades of inflicting violence. "Mr. Rios," Claude said, his accent thick and heavy. "You came alone. That is either very brave or very stupid." "It is neither." Damien came to a stop about 20 feet away. "You are certain of that?" Claude offered a cold, predatory smile. "Certain of what, exactly?" "That you are going to be leaving this city tonight." The smile on Claude's face vanished instantly. "You believe you can threaten me here in my own territory?" "This is not your territory," Damien said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It is mine. You have simply been borrowing it for a while, and now I am here to collect on the debt." Claude's men shifted their weight, their hands inching closer to their weapons. "You attack my warehouse," Damien continued, his voice never rising in volume. "You breach the sanctity of my home. You put a gun to the head of someone who is under my direct protection." He took another deliberate step forward. "Those were mistakes. They were fatal ones." "You protect a woman and her little brats," Claude spat with disgust. "That is what makes you weak." "No." Damien's expression transformed into something truly lethal. "That is what makes me dangerous. Because now, I have something that I am willing to burn your entire operation to the ground for." "Those are big words for a man who is outnumbered." "Then you should count again." In an instant, powerful floodlights blazed to life all throughout the massive warehouse. From out of the deepest shadows, Damien's men emerged. It was not just a few of them, but dozens, strategically positioned on the catwalks high above and behind the stacks of cargo. Men stood by steel containers at every single exit. They were armed, silent, and waiting for a single command from their leader. The blood drained from Kozlov's face, leaving it a sickly white. "You wanted to see my weakness," Damien said, his voice cutting through the drumming rain. "You thought protecting them would make me easy to break. So let me be perfectly clear." He moved forward, rain slicking his dark hair. "Those children are now my responsibility. That makes them completely untouchable. Anyone who gets close to them, anyone who even dares to think about harming them, will have to answer to me directly. You cannot shield them forever. I can shield them longer than you will survive in this city." Damien's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "I am aware of every deal you make, every secret account you hold, and the name of every official you have paid off." He lifted his phone, the screen glowing in the darkness. "One single call, and it all vanishes. Your money, your influence, your ways out of here." Kozlov's teeth ground together in fury. Or, Damien offered, you can just walk away tonight. Move your entire operation out of my city, and I will permit you to live. That is not a choice. It is the only option you have. For a long, heavy moment, the only sound in the warehouse was the storm hammering against the metal roof. Then, Kozlov gave one sharp, resentful nod, a clear sign of his defeat. This is not the end, Rios. Oh yes, Damien replied calmly. It is. He remained perfectly still as Kozlov and his crew retreated, their vehicles vanishing into the rain-drenched night. He waited until the last red taillights were gone. Only then did he turn to Jules. I want them out of the state. Make certain of it. If they are anywhere in this territory by sunrise, give them a powerful reason to regret it. Yes, sir. Damien strode back toward the sedan, the cool rain doing little to calm the fire of adrenaline still burning in his system. He had achieved victory. The danger had been eliminated. But as he settled into the car's leather seat, his only thought was of returning to the penthouse, of getting back to them. Damien entered a silent penthouse at 3 o'clock in the morning. The security team acknowledged him with quiet nods, confirming the night had been peaceful. There were no incidents, no new threats. They were safe. He should have felt a wave of relief. Instead, a profound exhaustion settled over him like a crushing weight. He had used the hours since the confrontation at the docks to secure every last detail. He made sure all of Kozlov's partners were identified and given a final warning, and that every access point to the city was now being watched. The job was finished. It was finally over. He discovered Camilla asleep on the sofa, huddled beneath a blanket with her phone still clutched in her hand. It was clear she had been waiting for his message, the one that would confirm he was still alive. A strange tightness gripped his chest. Damien moved without a sound to his office, shutting the door behind him before pouring a drink he had no desire to consume. Outside the massive windows, the city lights spread out like a cold, indifferent galaxy, full of dangers he could never fully control. But on this night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he had won a fight that held true meaning. The door creaked open behind him. You are back, Camilla said, her voice soft with sleep. He turned to face her. She lingered in the doorway, her hair a beautiful mess and her eyes filled with concern. I am back, he affirmed. Did you handle it? She seemed unable to say the words. It is finished. Kozlov has agreed to leave the city for good. His entire enterprise is being torn down. The danger is gone now. Pure relief washed over her features, making her look younger. So we are actually safe? Yes. She closed the distance between them and embraced him again. It was a sudden, powerful hug, as if she had to feel him to believe he was truly there. Damien remained rigid, unsure how to respond, what to do with his own hands, or with the simple warmth of another person holding him. Thank you, she whispered into his chest. Thank you for protecting us. He knew he should have said something, anything, to accept her gratitude. But instead, he carefully pulled away and went to the window. You should begin packing your things, he stated quietly. What? Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. The danger has passed. You are now free to go anywhere you wish. He purposefully kept his back to her, certain that if he saw the look on her face, he would lose his resolve. I will provide you with new identities, secure bank accounts, and references for a home and a job. I will give you everything you need to begin a new life somewhere truly safe. You are sending us away. No, I am giving you your freedom. His own voice sounded hollow and foreign even to him. This is what you have wanted all along, is it not? To feel secure, to raise your children without constantly fearing what is in the shadows? Yes, but then accept it. He finally turned to face her, and the raw pain in her expression almost shattered his composure. Take your children and find a place of peace, a place far from this city, and far from men like Koslov. Far from you? The question hung between them, as dangerous as a live wire. Damien's jaw tightened. You have no idea what you are saying. Yes, I do, she insisted, taking a step toward him. In these last few weeks, I have seen the way you are with Maya and Luca. I have seen how you have guarded us, how you have cared for us. I am not a good person, Camilla. His voice grew hard and cold. You have witnessed the things I do, the things I am capable of achieving. That violence, that need for control, it does not simply vanish because I purchase stuffed animals for your daughter. I know you are not a perfect man. I have taken lives. The confession was torn from his soul. Not tonight. But it has happened before. I have dealt with people who threatened what belonged to me, people who I have gone past all the lines. The things I have done would make you physically ill if you understood the specifics. She did not even blink. Did they deserve what you did to them? The question completely blindsided him. What was that? The men you ended? Did they deserve it? Damien thought of all the traffickers he had taken down through the years. He remembered the ones who targeted children, the ones who had forced other families to live through the same nightmare that had destroyed his. Yes, he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. In that case, I will not be the one to judge you for it. Camilla's voice was perfectly level. You are not a monster, Damien. Monsters do not weep for sisters they have lost. They never promise frightened children that they are now safe. And they certainly do not risk absolutely everything to shield people they hardly know. But you hardly know me. I know what is important, she said, closing the final few feet of space that separated them. I know that you could have abandoned us in that dark alley. You could have allowed those men to take my children from me. You could have used us as a distraction, or as a bargaining chip, or for anything else that would have served your own purposes. Her eyes were shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. But you did not do any of that. You rescued us. And after that, you continued rescuing us, again and again. That does not make me worthy of— He could not bring himself to say the words. Worthy of what? He turned his gaze away from her. Of you choosing to stay. Camilla reached a hand up, gently guiding his face back toward hers. What if staying is what I want? Why on earth would you want a thing like that? His voice was brittle and cracked. This existence, the life I lead, it is filled with danger and violence. You and your children deserve something so much better than this. We deserve the right to choose for ourselves, she cut in with unwavering firmness. And I am choosing this. I am choosing you. My children have put their trust in you. They finally feel secure when they are with you. And as for me, she inhaled, a slight tremor in her breath. I have not felt safe in so many years, not for a single moment until I met you. Damien wanted to protest, to push her away because it was the right thing to do for her safety. But dear God, he was so tired. He was tired of being completely alone, so tired of erecting fortifications around anything good that entered his life, because he was terrified of it being taken away. If you decide to stay, he stated with deliberate care, you will stay knowing exactly what I am and what it is that I do. I am aware of that. If you stay, you are choosing this life. The bodyguards, the constant threat, the cold reality that I have powerful enemies who would not hesitate to harm you just to hurt me. I am aware of that as well. And you are certain? He searched her expression for any doubt. Are you absolutely certain? Camilla offered a small, but completely genuine smile. You made a promise to protect us. Did you mean what you said? Yes. Then I am certain. For what felt like an eternity, they simply stood there in the quiet. Then Damien did something he had not permitted himself to do in many years. He pulled her into an embrace and held on, as if she were the last anchor to his own humanity. I do not know how to do any of this, he confessed, his words muffled by her hair. How to be this person? What kind of person? Someone who is worth staying for. Camilla leaned back just far enough to meet his gaze. Then that is something we will learn to do together. And in that one moment, standing there in his office with the city lights twinkling far below and the crushing weight of his world finally feeling bearable, Damian Rios let himself feel something he was sure had perished, along with Isabella. He allowed himself to feel hope. The morning arrived, feeling far too bright and intensely real. Camilla awoke in the guest suite, the morning sun pouring through the large windows she had neglected to cover. For a few seconds, she remained still, allowing her mind to process everything that had transpired. The intense conversation she had with Damien, the monumental choice she had made, and the terrifying yet thrilling new reality that she had actually decided to stay. The sound of voices drifted in from the direction of the kitchen, the voices of her children. She rose from the bed quickly, slipping on the soft robe Damien had provided for her and walking quietly down the long hallway. The scene that she discovered there made her stop completely. Damien was seated at the massive kitchen table wearing only a simple black t-shirt and his dress pants from the night before, the intricate tattoos covering his arms in full view. He was making pancakes while Maya and Luca sat directly across from him. Maya was chattering away about the different shapes she could see in the clouds outside the window. Luca was asking one question after another about how tall the building was, and Damien, the most feared man in the city, who had just dismantled a whole criminal network the night before, was patiently answering every question while expertly flipping pancakes. Maya was the first to see her. "Mom, Damien is making us all breakfast." Luca beamed at her. He said he learned how from his sister and that she used to make him practice all the time. Damien's expression briefly shifted, a complex mixture of pain and affection, but he continued to cook. "Good morning," he said, his eyes still on the skillet. "Good morning," Camilla answered, making her way toward the coffee maker. "You know how to cook. Only on occasion, when it becomes necessary," he replied. "Today, it is necessary." He finally allowed his eyes to meet hers, and a spark of warmth appeared in them. It just felt like the right kind of morning for it. Maya bounced with excitement in her chair. "Can we please stay here forever and ever?" The question seemed to hang in the silent room. Luca's fork stopped moving halfway to his lips, his gaze flicking back and forth between Damien and his mother. Camilla sat down at the table slowly, reaching out a hand to gently stroke Maya's hair. "Is that what you would want, sweetie, to stay here with us?" "Yes," Maya declared without a moment's hesitation. "Damien keeps us safe, and he is teaching me how to play chess. And he even said that maybe we could get a puppy if we—" She trailed off, her expression turning uncertain. "Are we going to leave?" "I do not know the answer to that yet," Camila answered cautiously. "That is a very big decision that all of us need to discuss together." Luca put his fork down on his plate. "I like it here." His voice was soft but filled with conviction. "I like the feeling of not being afraid all of the time." A lump formed in Camilla's throat. Damien set a plate filled with freshly made pancakes in front of each child, and then took a seat himself. For a long moment, he simply watched them. These two small children had somehow worked their way into the very center of his world. "If you decide to stay," he began carefully, "everything is going to be very different from how it was before. There will be no more hiding and no more running away. But that will also mean living with armed guards and with very strict security rules. It means living with the fact that the world I exist in is full of dangers." "We already know all about dangers," Luca stated, his tone matter-of-fact. "We have been running away from them for many months. This is a different kind of danger." "Is it really?" The boy's eyes held a wisdom that was far beyond his years. "The men who were trying to hurt us, they are gone now, aren't they?" "Yes, they are. Because you were the one who stopped them." "Yes. Well then, staying here with you is much safer than any other place we could possibly go." Luca's reasoning was straightforward and impossible to argue with. Maya nodded her head in vigorous agreement. "And you gave us your word. You said we were safe with you." Damien looked directly at Camilla, a flicker of vulnerability showing in his expression. It is your call to make. No, she replied gently. It is our decision to make. All of us. Together. She considered the kind of life she might be able to create somewhere else. A new city, a different name. But she would always be wondering if someone was coming for them. She would always be looking over her shoulder. Then she gazed at her children, their faces filled with light, their bodies finally looking healthy, and she heard them laughing for what felt like the first time in months. She looked at Damien, who watched them with a fierce, protective gaze that was clearly more than just a sense of duty or a professional obligation. I want to stay, Maya declared loudly. I am voting to stay. Me too, Luca quickly added. They both turned to look at Camilla, their faces full of expectation. She met Damien's gaze from across the table. She could see the hope he was trying so hard to conceal. She could also see his fear that she would turn down what he was offering them. Okay, she said in a quiet voice. We will stay. Maya let out a cheer. Luca smiled, a true, genuine smile that finally reached his eyes for the first time she could remember. And Damien closed his eyes for just a second, as if he were absorbing the immense gravity of her words. When he opened them again, something inside him had changed. Something had finally found its place. Then we are going to do this the right way, he said. A new school for the children, with proper registration and completely clean records. And you, he said, turning his attention to Camilla. Whatever it is that you need. Job training, more education, or just the space to decide what it is you want for your future. What I want is to not feel like I am a burden, she told him. You are not a burden. His voice was unyielding. You are family. That single word seemed to fill the entire room. Family. Maya let out a giggle, like a real family, with a dad and everything else. An abrupt silence fell over the table. Camilla's heart began to beat faster. She had not stopped to think about how this situation might appear to her children. She had not considered that they might see Damien as something much more than just their protector. Damien very carefully placed his coffee cup back on the table. That is a complicated issue. Why? Luca asked. You protect us. You live here with us. You care about what happens to us. He tilted his head to one side. That is what fathers are supposed to do, is it not? I am not, Damien began to say, but then he stopped himself. He looked over at Camilla with a helpless expression. She knew she should be the one to correct them. She should be explaining the lines and the boundaries. But when she saw the look on Damien's face, so vulnerable and terrified, and so desperately wanting something he truly believed he could never have, she just could not do it. That is something we would all need to discuss, she said with great care. All of us together, when we feel ready to talk about it. I am ready right now, Maya announced. Me too, Luca seconded. Damien looked as if he had just been struck. You children do not understand what it is you are asking for. Yes, we do, Luca insisted with that same premature wisdom. We are asking if you will just keep on being what you have already been to us. Someone who makes sure we are safe. Someone who cares about us. I am not a good role model. You are our role model, the boy interrupted him again. You were the one who came for us when nobody else in the world did. Damien's jaw tightened. He looked at Camilla, clearly feeling like he was drowning. She reached her hand across the table and took his. We do not have to have all the answers figured out today, but if this is what you want, if you want us, then we are here. We are choosing you as well. His hand closed tightly around hers. I do not know how to be the person you need. Neither do we, she confessed. We are all just figuring this out as we go, together. Maya slipped down from her chair and without any hesitation, climbed right into Damien's lap. He immediately went stiff with sheer surprise, but she simply curled up against his chest, as if it were the most normal place in the entire world. You are warm, she mumbled into his shirt, and you smell like coffee and safety. Luca actually laughed. That is a very specific smell. It is true, though. Maya looked up at Damien, her eyes filled with complete and total trust. You do. Damien looked down at the small girl resting in his arms. Then he looked at the boy who was watching him with a careful, budding hope, and then at Camilla, who was offering him a life he never imagined he could possess. Okay, he said, his voice quiet and rough with emotion. We will try. All of us, as a family. And as the sunlight poured through the high windows, and the sounds of the city buzzed far below them, two children who had only known terror finally let themselves relax completely. Damien Rios learned that there was a force more powerful than any empire he could ever build. It was the feeling of belonging. The rain finally stopped later that afternoon. Camilla stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, observing as the city began to dry under a pale and watery sun. In the room behind her, she could hear Luca's voice as he explained the complicated rules of some card game to Damien, who listened with a level of patience she never would have imagined from a man who ran half the city's criminal empire. Maya was on the floor, surrounded by a rainbow of crayons, absorbed in a drawing she would not let anyone see until it was absolutely perfect. The scene felt completely normal, so wonderfully and impossibly normal. Mom, Luca called out from the table. Can we please go to the park tomorrow? The one Damien told us about. The one with the really big playground. Camilla looked over at Damien, who gave a small, consenting nod. We will have to bring security, he stated plainly. But yes, we can go. Why do we need to have security? Maya asked, her concentration finally breaking as she looked up from her artwork. Because there are some people who might try to bother us, Damien explained to her, his tone careful and gentle. And my job is to make completely sure that you are always safe. Will they bother us forever? Probably not, he said. But it is always better to be safe than to be sorry. Maya thought about this with all the seriousness a 5-year-old could gather for such a heavy topic. Then she just shrugged. Okay, as long as we can still go. Luca placed a card down with a look of pure triumph. I learned how to do that from watching you work yesterday. Damien arched a single eyebrow, his expression knowing. So you were observing my work through the crack in the door? He paused. You were also on a phone call with someone, discussing shipping lanes and various distribution centers. The boy's face broke into a wide grin. You were talking about strategic placement and the best way to allocate resources. Damien seemed genuinely curious. And you were able to comprehend all of that? Well, some of it, Luca admitted. You are incredibly smart. A complex emotion flickered across Damien's features. It was a mixture of surprise and something that looked surprisingly like pride. Camilla watched the exchange, her heart swelling with a feeling she hadn't known for a long time. This quiet moment was the very thing she had dreamed about during those terrifying months on the run. It was never about wealth or extravagant luxury, but simply this: her children being safe, feeling genuinely happy, and finally having the freedom to just be children. Her phone vibrated on the table. It was a text message from Dr. Reina, confirming the follow-up medical appointments for both kids the following week. Another notification followed from the private school Damien had arranged for them, a warm, welcome message for the upcoming fall semester. This was a real life, a chance to build something solid and permanent. Damien, Camilla said softly. He glanced up from the card game he was playing with Luca. Can we speak for a moment in private? A flicker of understanding passed through his dark eyes. He calmly played his next card, told Luca he would return in a moment, and then followed Camilla toward the heavy door of his office. She pushed it closed behind them, the soft click of the latch amplifying her sudden wave of nervousness. What is the matter? He asked, his tone direct and perceptive. Nothing is wrong at all. She drew in a deep, steadying breath. I needed to be certain that you are truly all right with this entire situation, with us remaining here, and with the things the children said this morning at breakfast about the idea of family. Damien leaned his weight back against the edge of his large desk, crossing his arms over his chest. Are you the one who is having second thoughts? No, not at all, she said quickly. But I have to make sure that you are not. He remained silent for a long moment, his intense, dark eyes studying her face with unreadable depth. I dedicated years of my life to constructing this empire, he said at last, his voice low. I was creating something that would make me so powerful that I would never have to be helpless again. I would never have to stand by and watch someone I cared about vanish simply because I lacked the strength to protect them. I understand that, but it was an empty existence. All of that immense power, all of that precise control, and at the end of every day, I was still completely alone. He glanced toward the closed door, where they could faintly hear Maya humming a little tune and the soft shuffling of Luca's cards. Then you appeared in that dark alley, with no shoes on your feet, and a look of complete desperation in your eyes. And you were offering me your own children because you truly believed it was the only possible way to ensure their survival. A knot of emotion tightened in Camilla's throat as the painful memory surfaced. The smart thing to do would have been to just give you money, Damien continued, his voice a low rumble. I should have established a safe place for you to live somewhere far away and then just moved on with my life. That would have been the intelligent, strategic choice. Then why did you not do that? She asked softly. Because when I looked at your children, I saw her. I saw Isabella, and I simply could not do it. His voice faltered for just a fraction of a second. I could not walk away from you and be forced to spend the remainder of my life wondering if I had repeated the exact same mistake a second time. Camilla took a deliberate step closer to him. This is not a mistake, is it? I am pulling you directly into my world, Camilla, into my dangers and all of my complications, he stated. And you are offering us safety, she countered. You are offering us security and a real chance to finally stop running for our lives. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. That is not a mistake at all. That is an incredible gift. I do not know how to be the person they need, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not know how to be a father figure or a good influence. I am a criminal, Camilla. I break laws for a living, I hurt people, and I make decisions that most of society would label as profoundly immoral. Do you ever hurt innocent people? She asked. No, he answered without hesitation. Do you offer protection to the vulnerable whenever you are able to? Do you care deeply about my children? His response this time was immediate and certain. Yes. Then that is all that matters. That is more than enough, she insisted. We do not need you to be a perfect man. We just need you to be yourself. Damien looked down at her with an expression of something that resembled pure wonder. How can you be so certain about all of this? Because for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I am no longer living in fear. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. My children laugh now. They can sleep peacefully through the entire night. They speak about their future as if it is a real, tangible thing, instead of just a struggle to survive one more day. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. You are the one who gave that back to us. You gave us hope. He slowly lifted his hand, the one covered in intricate tattoos, and gently cupped her face. I do not deserve you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Maybe you do not, she whispered back. But you have me now anyway. The kiss he gave her was exceptionally gentle and careful, as if he were afraid of shattering something incredibly precious. When they finally drew apart, Camilla rested her forehead against his. So we are really doing this? He murmured against her skin. Yes, she affirmed. We are really doing this. A soft knock at the office door caused them to step away from each other. Come in, Damien called out, his voice now steady. Luca cautiously poked his head into the room. Are you two finished with your talk? Because Maya has completed her drawing, and she says she will only reveal it if all of us are together. Camilla let out a soft laugh. We are coming right now. They followed Luca back into the spacious living room, where Maya was standing with her artwork clutched in her hands, her posture radiating pride. "Okay," she announced with great ceremony. "Everyone close your eyes." They all complied, including Damien, who closed his eyes without question. "Now you can open them." Camilla opened her eyes and felt an immediate sting of tears. The drawing showed 4 crudely drawn stick figures. There was a woman with long, flowing brown hair, and next to her were 2 smaller figures, one with a bow in her hair and the other wearing a baseball cap. Standing beside them was a tall figure dressed in black, with detailed markings on his arms. Hovering above them all, written in Maya's careful 5-year-old script, were the words, "Our family." Damien just stared at the piece of paper, appearing as if he could not fully comprehend what he was looking at. "Do you like it?" Maya asked, her voice filled with a hint of anxiety. His own voice was rough with emotion when he answered. "Yes, I like it a great deal." "You can hang it up in your office," she offered, "so that you can remember." "Remember what?" Maya looked at him as if the answer was the simplest thing in the world. "That you are not alone anymore." The innocent words seemed to strike him with a physical force. For a split second, Camilla thought he might actually begin to cry. Instead of crying, he crouched down to her level and enveloped Maya in a fierce, protective hug. "Thank you," he whispered into her soft hair. "Thank you for reminding me." Luca immediately joined the embrace without needing an invitation, and soon Camilla found herself drawn into it as well. It was a wonderful tangle of arms and warmth and a profound sense of belonging that felt more solid and secure than any reinforced walls or sophisticated security systems ever could. When they finally separated, Damien very carefully took the drawing from Maya. He carried it into his office and placed it on his desk, in a spot where he could see it from anywhere in the room. "There," he said with finality, "so that I will never forget." Later that night, long after the children had been tucked into bed and the sprawling penthouse was cloaked in silence, Camilla found Damien standing out on the balcony. The vast city glittered beneath them, a sea of lights reflecting off towering glass and steel, endless and pulsating with life. She quietly slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking about right now?" she asked him. "I constructed this entire empire so that I would feel powerful," he said in a low voice, "so that I would never have to be helpless ever again." He then turned to look at her, and deep in his eyes she saw something she had never witnessed there before. It was peace. "Now I have come to realize that real power is not about controlling this entire city," he continued. "It is about having something truly worth protecting within these walls." He gently pulled her closer to him. "It is you. It is them. It is all of this." "A completely different kind of empire," Camilla murmured, her voice full of emotion. "It is the only kind that actually matters." Inside, visible through the large glass doors, they could see the small reminders of the new life they were building together. Luca's baseball cap was sitting on the kitchen counter, and Maya's favorite stuffed rabbit was resting on the couch. It was not a perfect life, and it certainly was not simple, but it was real. It was a life they had chosen, and it was worth every single risk Damien had ever taken to protect it. "I love you," Camilla said, the words coming out before she had even consciously thought them, but they felt completely true. Damien looked at her with such raw, unguarded vulnerability that it made her breath catch in her throat. "I love you too," he replied, his voice earnest. "All of you." And as they stood there together, overlooking the very city that had tried so hard to break them, now rain-washed and quiet under a sky of emerging stars, Damien Rios finally understood what his sister would have wanted for him. It was never about revenge or accumulating power. It was about this: love, family, and a place to call home. The vast empire he had painstakingly built to honor her memory had ultimately given him something far more valuable in return. It had given him a profound reason to continue living. If this story left a mark on you, hit that like button so it can reach someone else who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who understands that real family is not about blood. It is about who refuses to let go. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment that hit you the hardest? The 23 minutes that changed everything? Maya's drawing? Or the moment he tried to send them away? And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. I put my heart into every single story, and I do not want you to miss the next one. If you are ready for another emotional journey, the next video is right on your screen. This content was carefully researched, crafted, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and inspiration.